again, the questions that we're going to answer at a high level today is, why is documentation important? Who is responsible for employee documentation? What should be documented? When should documentation occur? Where should documentation be stored? And then how should documentation be presented? So, as we go through this, again, this is not going to be exhaustive. The purpose of this is just because we're going to, over the course of the next several months, my goal is once a week to be able to do a leadership, or to do, excuse me, HR policy, or just work with you guys and provide you guys a 30-minute time block where you can come in, we can circle the wagons like this, and we can all have a learning opportunity. So, by the way, did anybody hear my initial opening remarks about the position guidelines?
No.
Okay.
No.
Okay. I'm going to go back and cover something real quick. I want to give a big shout out to everybody on this team. I had, out of the 43 people that were expected to turn in position guidelines, I had a 95% participation rate. I got back 95% of the ones that I needed. Actually, only 2 people did not turn them in, and I expected less than that. So you guys are overachievers, and I give you guys a standing ovation for that outstanding meeting that deadline. I also have to give a shout out to 3 different teams who not only turned in, the supervisor not only turned in their position guideline, but the entire team was completed. Number 1, Ed's team with Reliance Works and his different crews. He got everybody turned in, which is outstanding. Jared at Howard's Metal Service got all of his team turned in along with his. And then yesterday I met with Susan Caldwell, her team. We met together yesterday, and I expect by close of business today, I'll probably see everybody on that team with a complete position guideline turned in, which is outstanding. So, but great job to everybody. Thank you for helping me get this phase of the position guidelines accomplished. So back on this, the big question that we have to answer is, why is documentation important? And everybody that's on this call is a representative of Isaiah House. You represent Isaiah House and this organization and the mission and vision as it relates to managing employees and helping us to mitigate risk. Number 1, documentation is essential for employers to properly evaluate, discipline, and/or terminate employees. And one of the words that I want to accentuate there is the word evaluate. And if you'll see my footnote down there, it says evaluate means positive or needs improvement. The one thing that I don't want to be misunderstood in this PowerPoint, or this what I'm trying to accomplish today, we need to be about giving people positive feedback and catching them doing things right. Our documentation process and how we manage the performance of our staff cannot be, we have to be a coach and a teacher more than we are a cop. Does that make sense? Everybody give me a thumbs up, like Jacob Rice was giving me a thumbs up on this yesterday. We have to be in the business of coaching, teaching, and developing our staff every single day. That's what a supervisor's role is all about. It's about helping them to be trained and improve what they're doing. If we only take the approach that we're a cop and we're catching people doing stuff wrong, we will never reach our potential as an organization, period. So again, documentation is essential for the evaluation, discipline, and termination of employees. The second piece of this puzzle is documentation must be, if it's accurate and consistent, it increases our efficiencies in decision making and helps us reduce risk to the organization. Guys, one of the things that we will cover over the next many months, how do we make our documentation not an afterthought? It's accurate, it's consistent, and that therefore, when it's time to make tough decisions, and those tough decisions could be expanding budget for raises. That tough decision could be we need to suspend somebody for X amount of days, or we need to terminate that employee. The process or the time frame to get that accomplished is much more efficient. And just as important, if not more, Guys, my role in HR is one of my top 3 goals is to mitigate risk in the organization. And that risk is not just damage against our reputation, but that also is to mitigate risk against you as a supervisor. So if I've got Jacob or Wendy, or, if you guys are leading your teams, my job is to watch your back. That's April's job as well. We're trying to make sure that you guys are doing your job in such a way that we're not sitting side by side in a courtroom somewhere in front of a jury of our peers. So I don't think any of us want that. So the third thing is this benefits employees by providing feedback for improvement or a job well done. Guys, it's so important. I'm going to beat this drum until you guys kick me out of the organization or whatever you decide to do with me, stick a muzzle in my mouth. We have to make sure that we provide clear feedback for improvement or a job well done to employees. Again, your job is to be a teacher, a coach, an encourager, a trainer. We've got to work together to make sure that people understand what they're supposed to be doing and how they're supposed to do it. Again, one of the revelations that I had is I probably sat with almost 80% of the people on this call, and we went through your old job description. And, Casey Britton is an example. There were a lot of things in that job description that were relevant prior to Celerity, but are no longer relevant. So those, there was a good portion of that came out, and we had to update and improve that position guideline to make it relevant and current with what she does. So a big question that I've heard asked since I've been here is, who is responsible for what? So I'm going to start with human resources. Human resources is responsible for pre-onboarding paperwork. We've got to run the background check. We got to make sure that there's a drug screen in place. We have to check references. We have to make sure that the resume is checked. I mean, all of those things is what HR is responsible for from the beginning, because documentation happens in the very first conversation that we have with somebody who's interested in our organization. The employee handbook, that has to be signed. It has to be understood, etc. The non-compete agreement, drug and dating policy, the social media policy, and then the annual training. Again, I'm sure there's some other nuances here, maybe some things that I might have missed, but in a nutshell, these are the things that have to be in place before somebody steps foot on Isaiah House soil and starts their position with us. On the flip side of that, managers are responsible for an employee requisition sheet. The employee requisition sheet is, some of you guys, whether you've seen this or not, what this does is the manager, when they want to bring in an intern or they want to bring in an external employee or whatever that looks like, that requisition sheet is how HR knows, what are we going to pay that person? What's that person's role going to be? What's their work schedule? So on and so forth. It makes sure that there's clarity between us and you as a supervisor to know what you're going to be having that person do, what's their title, who they're going to report to, etc. The next piece of that puzzle, and I'm sure you guys hear my voice, in your nightmares talking about position guidelines and KPIs, unfortunately, but a position guideline, we owe it to every employee that walks across the threshold of our place of business to make sure that they clearly understand who they're reporting to, what their job title is, what they're supposed to do on a daily basis, and how they're measured to be successful. One of my mentors used to always say, I don't mind playing the game as long as I know the rules. And I think the KPI, the position guideline, helps people to understand what's the purpose of them being here and all of those things. How are they judged to be successful? The next one is 60-day reviews, annual reviews. I would make a note here, guys, that those 60-day and annual reviews are absolutely critical to your ability to lead your team well. It is an opportunity for you to evaluate their performance against their goals. And I'm not going to ask this across the board for everybody to answer, but whether you know it or not, inside Paycor, you should be set, especially for very key employees, you should have goals set up for them in Paycor so that when it's time to do the 60-day or the annual review, you can actually look at their goals. Of course, depending on the situation, you should be looking at their goals every day or every week with them and to make sure that they're on track. But the 60-day and the annual reviews are critical. As we go through these seminars in the next few weeks, the one thing you'll hear me say over and over again is that we have to be courageous about feedback that we give employees. We don't do anybody a favor, including us, if we give false feedback. We have to be courageous about being honest and forthright with how people are performing. If they are underperforming, if they need to make adjustments, if they are violating policy, we have to be upfront with that employee about those things in a professional way. Otherwise, we are setting ourselves up for a lot of heartburn, a lot of inefficiency, and a potential day in court. So I can't say enough how important those 60-day and annual reviews and those feedback, the coaching opportunities are. The other thing that supervisors are responsible for, anytime that there is coaching, verbal or written warnings, those things have to be documented. You'll see my footnote there that those need to happen in collaboration with HR. So before any documentation is finalized, signed by the employee and the manager or put in a file somewhere, it needs to be reviewed. It needs to be crafted by you as a supervisor, as the point person, but it will be reviewed, edited, and you'll get feedback from HR on making sure that it's buttoned up. The person who lives with these team members each day in the trenches are you as a supervisor. You as the supervisor should know that person's position guideline like the back of your hand. You should be familiar with the employee handbook and Isaiah House policy. You should be apprised of what's going on and communicate with HR, et cetera, on a regular basis to make sure that we're all collaborating and we know what's expected. But the coaching and the verbal written warnings or performance improvement plans, which is the next piece of this, those things should all stem from existing policy and expectations set off the position guidelines. So the final one there, the performance improvement plans, better affectionately known as a PIP. A performance improvement plan in a nutshell is what steps are we asking that employee in writing to follow to regain a good standing with the organization and demonstrate that they care, that they're engaged. A performance improvement plan means that person clearly understands these are the 3 or 5 things that they need to do effective immediately. And I think I forgot who it was on this call that I was talking to about this, but the language that I like to use in a performance improvement plan is you outline for that employee where they have underperformed specifically, and then you outline the steps that they need to take every day to regain a better status of performance in the organization. But the final thing that I'm going to say to an employee in that is, if they choose, and I'm using my words carefully here, if they choose to not follow the performance improvement plan, then they are choosing to resign from their position. So it's all about their choice. It's not our choice. Again, one of the things that you will hear me say over and over again, when it comes to separating from an employee and terminating their employment, they fire themselves. We don't fire them. You'll also hear me say to people, they put us in a position to make a decision that we don't want to make. So we are simply here to carry out the mission and the vision and to understand the policy and to make sure that our staff members are doing what we're asking them to do and they're also not violating policy. So what should be documented? Again, the one thing that you're not going to see on this slide is you're not going to see that we document kudos for hard work. You guys expect me to do hard work every day and to do my job. So that doesn't necessarily warrant kudos, all right? But in an instance where you have an employee that exceeds expectations or they show consistency loyalty, or they go above and beyond, those things should be documented. When somebody comes to me for a raise, or they come to you for a raise, you should be able to open that employee folder, and you should be able to find not just, well, they showed up tardy one day. You should also see evidence in writing of moments when they've exceeded expectations, they've been consistent, loyal, or they've gone above and beyond. Bottom line. I was talking to a supervisor in the organization, and one of the things that they were surprised, and I was surprised that they were surprised, is that we give kudos for areas like this. And the reality is that if you are a good coach, if you are a teacher, if you are a mentor, or you're discipling people, whatever words you want to use, you will get the behavior repeated that you highlight. So if somebody exceeds expectations, if they're going above and beyond, if you show gratitude and appreciation and you give them praise for that, you'll get more of that. I promise you. It's without debate. Okay. The other thing that I want to accentuate here is, just because somebody doesn't ask for kudos doesn't mean they don't want it. One of the 5 love languages in the book that Dr. Gary Chapman wrote in marriages is words of affirmation. And if you've not read that book, you should read that book, because everybody has a different love language. But I can tell you that we should, as a matter of standard practice, we should show gratitude and appreciation for what people do every day here. One of the things that I walked away from every single meeting, I met with Wendy, I met with Missy Price, Peyton, Glenn. I mean, I met with almost everybody on this call, Denzel. And one of the things that I walked away with is I walked away with a lot of gratitude and appreciation for what everybody does here. Everybody that is here is doing, a lot each day. There's a lot on your plate, and you've got a lot of responsibility. It's a complex environment. You've got a lot of things going on coming at you. And I walked away with a sense of just awe. Wow, there's a lot going on at Isaiah House. This person in this role, again, has a lot on their plate. The next piece of this here, obviously, if they violate an IH policy procedure, drugs, tardiness, theft, whatever, if they're underperforming, KPIs, this is where KPIs are so important, guys. Can't stress that enough. Another one that is not necessarily easy to measure, but is equally as important, is negativity, gossip, or a lack of engagement. When you look at the position guidelines, there's that section on there that says an ideal candidate is flexible, has a positive attitude, is, et cetera, right? We covered that. I covered that with everybody on here. Guys, one of the things, again, as a supervisor, I'm going to ask everybody on here to embrace just a maniacal opposition to negativity, gossip, or lack of engagement, and do it with love. And I'm going to ask everybody on here to evaluate themselves as a manager. I do it every day. I drove home the other day, and I'd been in a conversation with different supervisors, and I was looking in the mirror and I was saying, in any way was I negative as I engaged my team today? Do I owe anybody an apology, or do I need to ask anybody for forgiveness because maybe even my body language or anything was maybe critical about whatever? I always ask myself that question, because nothing will kill an organization faster and get out of check, negativity, gossip, or just people not being engaged. So I'm going to speed up a little bit because I am starting to run out of time based on my inability to understand how to use Teams and PowerPoint earlier. I'll take ownership of that. When should documentation occur? Guys, if you have a team member that violates a policy, or they don't follow through, or they're underperforming, the first thing that I'm going to tell everybody and suggest that everybody do on this that's in leadership here is I'm going to suggest that you go look in the mirror and check yourself, your processes, and your level of training. And I'll use April and Richie and my team as an example. If something doesn't get done, or there's a mess up, or if I feel like somebody is not engaged, or they are not doing what they need to do, The first place I go is I look in the mirror. I check my ego at the door. I check myself and say, Morgan, did you thoroughly communicate with this person what you expected? Is it in writing? Have they been trained on the process? And guys, as a little footnote here, if you show somebody how to do something one time, that is completely inadequate, and that's on you as a leader. Chick-fil-A, anybody that's been through a Chick-fil-A drive-thru will tell you that it's the best drive-thru on the planet. I don't care how backed up they are. And one of my friends here in Lexington used to train and open Chick-fil-A stores, and he said that when they hire a Chick-fil-A staff member, I think it was between 12 and 14 times that they train somebody on a process. That's a lot. But that's the reason that they are successful, is because when that person is put in that position, they know what's up. If we are handing somebody a position guideline and sticking them in front of a computer and showing them how to do something one time and walk away, then that's on you. I suggest as a supervisor that the first place you need to go is to the mirror and check yourself, your processes, and your level of training that you're providing for your staff. End of story. A lot of times when you do that, it doesn't have to go any further, because you realize that a lot of times I realize with my teams in the past, when I do this exercise, I realize that I'm the problem, not the employee. And you have to have courage as a supervisor and a leader. You have to have the courage to have that conversation with yourself. And I hope that's not coming across as too intense or harsh, but I mean, it's true. Second thing is, as soon as possible, after your observation or interaction, that warrants a discussion. It warrants documentation. The longer you let time go past an incident, guys, the more things are going to get fuzzy or confusing. So you have to do it right away. Where should documentation be stored? It needs to be stored in Paycor and or the employee file located in the HR department. It needs to be secure. All right, this is the last slide. So I'm going to, again, and we'll cover more and more of this in detail over the next several weeks. How should documentation be shared? First of all, you got to be professional. Guys, keep in mind, it's never personal. Keep it professional. We have to be specific. We have to be concise. We have to be clear about what we need moving forward. We have to be planned. What I mean by be planned, and don't miss this, guys, if I'm going into a write-up discussion, or if I'm going into a performance improvement meeting with a staff member, before I go into that meeting, I want to have a conversation with you as the supervisor, and I want to say, okay, who's saying what, when, what's the agenda? What are we trying to accomplish in this meeting? You guys should never go into a meeting that involves a write-up or involves an employee discipline issue or even a verbal without having a pre-call plan. What are we going to talk about? Who's going to say what? What are we going to present? Who's going to sign what? You need to be buttoned up and ready to go when you go into that meeting so that there's no surprises. I have been on the cusp of going into disciplinary meetings here, and I've asked for this pre-call plan, or I've asked for the write-up or whatever the information is, and realized that we were going to cause ourselves a lot of heartburn if we proceeded. We got to be planned. The last thing on here, and I've already said this, is we have to be courageous. I can't stress this enough. We have to be professional. We have to be compassionate and kind, but we have to be honest with people. We have to tell people and give them constructive coaching when they are not meeting expectations. If you don't do that, and then all of a sudden you drop a write-up in their lap, that is very unprofessional, and that is not the type of behavior or practice that's going to hold up well in court. Because when you go into a court of law, was the employer fair? Were they fair to the employee? Did they communicate in advance to the employee what they expected? And did they attempt to coach them? Did they attempt to train them up? So the next piece of this is when and where. It depends on the infraction. If you have a fist fight breakout in your office, then you need to take some steps immediately. You know, if there's sexual harassment, etc., you better get on it. You better engage HR. You better, we're going to bring in some senior leadership. When and where also depends on the role. One of the things that parlays, it ties into this last piece here, is always in private. Guys, one of the things that I cannot stress enough is one of the biggest ways that you can honor and respect an employee and be professional is to have situational awareness. I'm never going to walk up to Jacob Rice or anybody in this organization, and I'm never going to call them out in front of other people. The meetings for discipline better be private and they better be discreet. My 2 rules of thumb when it comes to anything dealing with employees are this, and I want everybody to lean into what I'm about to say. You always praise somebody in public and you admonish them in private. If you have constructive coaching that you're going to give somebody, you better be professional, you better be specific, concise, clear, you better be courageous, but you better do it in private and you better do it with a witness, which is the next column of who. You should not, at this point, there should not be feedback, constructive coaching, or anything of that nature being given to a staff member without HR manager or director in place, especially if it's a write-up. If it's a verbal, you can run that by HR just to make sure it's buttoned up. But, and we'll talk in the next few weeks about the ways that you can say things to people to coach them in a way that doesn't leave them feeling beat up, because we don't want to do that. But guys should have an HR director or manager in place if you're going to discipline somebody, and it's going to be especially if it's going to be a write-up. The other piece on this is never male to female without a female manager or HR rep present. This is something that, again, I can't stress enough. We have to be respectful. We have to do things in private. But if I have to, discipline April, for example, that's never going to be a one-on-one conversation. There's going to be another female, or there's going to be a VP that's going to be involved in that conversation.
Morgan, this is Lena.
Okay.
I first of all, I want to thank you for doing this, because I think it's important for us to do this kind of stuff. And then I have 2 sort of questions. The first one is, in Paycor, could you identify exactly where you want us to put the positive praise? Because I've put it under coaching, but it looks like it's disciplinary. But if you open it up, it looks like something positive.
Okay. Can I table this and take it offline and look at Paycor?
Yes. And then also, another thing that I've noticed is that I would really love would be like a file maybe on Teams that has all of our HR files that we would need to access in it. So, because I've been saving mine personally, like as I go, but sometimes it's hard for me to find in my files, like, but if we have one go-to shop, then when someone new comes on board or moves up, then they would know where all these forms are and they can access them.
Yep. I was actually going to make an announcement at the end of this and let you know that I'm going to be setting up a Dropbox file that everybody's going to have access to with all the HR forms so that we can keep those current.
Awesome. Thank you.
So thank you for anticipating that, because again, and Lena, I really appreciate that, because it is very important that you guys have access to the forms and you have access to the processes and the policies. But thank you for that feedback. All right, guys, moving on to the final step here as we wrap this meeting up. Sorry for going 8 minutes over. I'll own that for being technically inept this morning. Over the course of the next several weeks, these are the areas that we're going to cover. So next week on the 9th, I'm going to send another calendar invite out, and we're going to cover the 10 sins of documentation. And I'm going to have some examples. I'm going to have some things that I share with you guys on that. The next one that we're going to cover on the 16th, and we may combine some of these depending on how much progress we make in HR on these. But I want to talk through the drug testing and the termination process with you guys. And one of the things that I want to illustrate here, I'm sure you guys have heard the word process or standard operating procedure 1,000 times since you've been here. And one of the things that I'm going to continually challenge the organization on, I'm going to challenge everybody on this call. If you tell me that you have a process for something, or that there is a process for something, I'm going to ask to see it in writing. Because one of the things that organizations are guilty of, every organization I've ever been a part of is guilty of saying, oh yeah, we have a process for that. But when you ask to see it in writing, it's nowhere to be found. The process is in somebody's between their ears. And so if it is not in writing, it does not exist. That's the bottom line. And that's with most things. So on the 23rd, we will cover the 5 characteristics of a great supervisor. Again, I'm going to encourage everybody to try to make these. I'm going to try to keep them short and sweet and not burn up a bunch of your time, because I want everybody to be engaged with them. But this is what's coming up. I'm going to ask everybody, I want everybody to email me with any recommendations for future training. If there are processes that we are not familiar with, or if there's confusion, or if you have suggestions like Lena made about setting up a file, etc., please do that. And I love feedback. I love collaboration, and I love being able to give you guys things that you find relevant and you guys find applicable to what you're going through every day.